And one of the things that I think folks have to understand, and I know the facilities guys do, every facilities guy out there understands everybody's emergency is their emergency, but that isn't necessarily your emergency. And so a lot of times what will happen is if you aren't prioritizing based on what the needs of your customer are in fix, sometimes you got to be really careful about how to manage those priorities within the system that gives your guys their basic work list of what they need to hit next. Make sure you're prioritizing correctly. And if it's something that needs to happen right now, let's go get it done. We'll get the work order entered as we go.
This is Facility Rockstars, the podcast that celebrates the unsung heroes of our daily lives, facility professionals. I'm your host, Jay Culbert. Join me as we honor these great leaders, sharing stories, insights, and expertise that empower us all to learn and grow together. Facility Rockstars is sponsored by Computerized, operating the way you operate in order to make your life easier.
Welcome back to Facility Rockstars. I'm your host, Jay Culbert. Today's guest is super interesting. I cannot wait to get into a discussion with him. He's a U.S. Navy veteran who served from 1990 to 2012. He served as Communications Electronics Technician, Chief Petty Officer aboard 5 nuclear submarines, overseeing 8 to 15 direct reports. He was responsible for the training and development of junior sailors and junior officers, as well as coordinating the maintenance and repair of the submarine's communications equipment. He's a natural-born leader and has a proven track record of successfully leading teams, driving performance, and delivering results in high-pressure environments. He's able to effectively manage a diverse team, oversee a wide range of projects, and leverage his technical acumen and managerial expertise to overcome unique challenges. He is the facilities manager at CirCor Aerospace and Defense. Dustin, or Dusty, Bussard, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you, Jay. I really appreciate you having me on. Been very much looking forward to this. Can't wait to get started here.
Same, man, same. I'm going to go a little rogue on the beginning here and say I have to know. I have an affinity for nuclear subs. I think they're very cool, and I think I shared with you before, I'm fortunate enough to walk under a Virginia class being built. So that being said, what kind of sub did you serve on?
So I was on 2 Sturgeon class submarines, so 60s era at the beginning of my career, the USS Ray and USS Sandlance, both stationed in Charleston, South Carolina. And then I went to a little shore duty stint, and then after that I was on USS Pittsburgh, on there for quite a while during Iraqi freedom, that whole scenario. And then USS Alexandria and USS Hartford. So 3 Los Angeles class in a row.
Beautiful. Thank you very much for your service, Dustin.
Yep, no problem. I appreciate it.
Of course. All right, man. 99% of the time I'll start with the same question. You've got a ton of experience, military, civilian. What has been, if you could pinpoint one, and we can talk about several, but let's start with one. What's been your biggest lesson learned in that journey?
Throughout the whole, military career, several different areas of manufacturing that I've been in. I've been on both the production and maintenance side. The biggest thing that I think I have taken away from all of it is relationship building. Building those relationships, not only with my team and who I have my direct reports are, but also with management above me. But a really important factor to that is building relationships with vendors, and making sure that, their needs are met as well as the needs of, what the company needs from them, and kind of getting the company in a good position to, for example, if you're doing a software solution to something and you have multiple sites, trying to leverage getting a better cost by utilizing that software at multiple sites versus just one, and building that relationship with the vendor in that arena to try to get them to meet your expectations as well as meeting theirs.
Outstanding. I'm glad you said this because this is a common, I think for obvious reasons, a common topic that comes up on the show and in our lives in general, right? If we don't communicate well, there's failures of all kinds.
Sure.
So you mentioned a few different aspects of communication. I think with internal team, managers, we report to, vendors, manufacturers. So let's break it down a little bit. And you started to, right? But what aspect of communication, I guess for you, Dustin, has been maybe the most successful, and then flip it to maybe the most challenging?
Sure. Probably the most successful is, and this I think harkens back not only to my, being in the Navy and the military training and discipline and that whole side of things, but also where I grew up. And one of the communications things that I have learned, people always talk about recruiters and didn't necessarily tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And I did a stint on recruiting, but even when I was out there doing that, communications piece is honesty. Just being completely honest about everything, whether it's talking to my direct reports, giving them the story, giving them the whys. We are doing this because, well, the reason we're changing this policy or the reason we're adding this equipment or taking this equipment away is because, giving them the reasons why. And that goes up as well. And to my counterparts on the same level as me. Why are we doing this? Well, this is why, and this is why it makes sense to do this, and to do it right now. So that's really kind of the biggest tool that I've used, is just to be completely honest with everybody I engage with.
Can I ask a question about that,
Sure,
Dustin?
sure.
So it kind of, and like everything's perspective, right? So honesty, I completely agree with you.
Yep.
And it's very challenging for many people to do that. Now, I'll say this. I believe because people typically don't want to deliver bad news. So it's either avoided or it's not the full truth or it's delayed or something like that. So here's my question for you. How do you achieve like honesty all the time in communication? Can you, and how do you tackle those things? Or do you agree with me about avoiding things?
I agree with you that does happen for sure. I do not. I just view it as that's my responsibility to deliver the good and the bad. That's my role. That's what I am there for. And again, to break that down further as to why, unfortunately for me, and I'm sure with a lot of your listeners, we've been in a position where we've had to let people go, or we've had to deliver some bad news that, maybe you're not getting the raise that you thought you were going to get. But I have found that every time, as long as I'm honest and I answer the questions honestly, typically not a lot comes out of it. There's not a lot of hard feelings, and most people appreciate it. And
it's
that's
a great quality to have. It's admirable. It's the way to be. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to break your stride there.
No problem. In fact, I mean, I can actually relate a story. I had a young man that worked for me, senior technician, had been at the company I was at for 13 years, knew everything inside and out. But he knew everything inside and out. And I think everybody probably has that guy that has been there, has kind of a rough attitude towards the company, and has expectations of what he feels he deserves. And so I had to break it down to him and explain to him, hey, you're a really good technician, but as far as being an employee, you're terrible.
Good for you. How'd that land?
He was angry. I mean, he was angry, but he actually came to me and said, that's the first honest review that I've ever had since I've been here. That's the first time anybody has said that.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Where did it go from there, Dustin?
He completely turned his attitude around, really became helpful, very company positive. Not that he was bad, like terrible to deal with, but much easier to handle. And he was one of those guys super smart too. So, and thought he was smarter than everybody around him. And that kind of, calmed down a lot much easier to communicate with him. So it worked out. And I've had that happen twice. Same kind of situation, once in the Navy, once outside the Navy. And both times, just being brutally honest with them has actually made the situation better.
It sounds to me like you'd be a fantastic communications mentor. Seriously, I really believe that, because this is not something that comes easily to people. Like, you deliver something like that to an employee, and look what it did for him. It was, yeah. So, like, you held him to a higher standard, is what I'm hearing, and you
Yes,
showed him the mirror, basically.
correct. And that's just something that nobody, because of his expertise, the previous folks, because he was able to challenge them with his expertise, it put them in an uncomfortable position. And again, this goes back to, I am sure, has to do with, some of the military background, but um, I'm comfortable in uncomfortables. I've been, I've had to deal with that, more than one occasion. So that's kind of how I ended up with where I'm at with the whole communication thing. And because when I was a junior person, I hated it when I didn't get the whole story, but I loved it and I could understand it. And as long as I understood the why, then it was never a problem, even if I didn't agree with the why.
I'm taking notes right now for
Sure.
myself. I understand the why. I mean, it's just like, that's the root, right? So what is or was a challenge for you in communication, and how did you overcome it? Maybe it was pre-military. How did you learn this skill?
Sure, I've had challenges. No one's perfect. I've had challenges communicating to people. Recruiting, a good example was, I went to a young lady's for a home visit with her and her parents. My boss was with me, kind of evaluating me while it was when I was brand new to recruiting. Gave them my presentation, and the young lady's father was a Vietnam veteran and had a real bad taste in his mouth about the military. And everything I said, he was just flipping it in a negative way, flipping it back at me and just turning it around. And honestly, I didn't know how to deal with it. And that was probably, I learned a ton out of that and how to handle those situations from my boss, because he just stayed very calm. He thought about what the young lady's father was saying, and then he said, okay, these are the reasons why that's not true. And that's why it's not what you're thinking. And this is what we can do to help your daughter. So I learned a ton from him just on that one visit. He was a great mentor, taught me a lot about how to communicate.
Great story. Thank you
Yep.
for relating it.
Yep.
Perfect. I have a note here, and I'm not sure if it fits at this juncture, but you started in production, or something started in production with finger pointing. I don't think we touched on that, did we?
No, not yet. I started out in production, actually, and didn't flip over to the maintenance side until, full-time maintenance. I didn't flip over till a year or two after I was in the civilian community. But when I started out in production, one of the very first things that I noticed, and have noticed ever since, is there's a tendency between production and maintenance to finger point back and forth. Whose fault is it? Why are we not meeting the numbers? Why can't this thing be done? And that also harkens back to, you know, building those relationships. So my previous employer, it was really bad when I got there with the finger pointing. So they ended up getting a new production manager. As soon as he came in, I worked with him to build that relationship, to make sure him and I were on the same page, because that eased things up not only for his team, and made things helpful for them, and they felt more comfortable communicating, but it made things easier for my team as well. And then the two teams actually, because him and I communicated a lot better and built that relationship with each other, it helped our teams communicate better because they felt more comfortable going to each other and not having to worry about what was, the anvil's going to fall on their head when the other manager finds out they said something. So it worked out. Before I left, it was a pretty well-oiled machine with regard to communications between the two departments.
It's a great story of turnaround. Like great job taking a challenging situation and creating a successful result out of it.
Yep.
So I thought that was going to tie back to communication. I like how that all loops back together there. So for people listening, for my benefit and everyone in the audience, if they haven't had military training, which I've not, by the way, if they didn't get the chance to sit with their boss or mentor in front of that Vietnam vet who was challenging every turn,
right?
What would be a best practice or piece of advice you'd give, Dustin? Right? Where do they start?
The first thing that I try to do with regard to communications is listen. Listen first. You have to keep your mind open. Listen to what whomever you're communicating with. Listen to what their concerns are. And then even if it takes you a moment to kind of gain your bearings and think about what they're saying, I always look at it, particularly from a maintenance perspective, I always look at, the production side, they're my customer. And so I'm there to make them happy. And so I try to take that on, and I try to, have my team kind of think that way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a challenge sometimes. And so as long as you can stop and kind of try to look at things from their perspective and what their challenge is and why that's a challenge for them, and then communicate back possible solutions. And then, again, it goes back to talking to each other, keeping an open mind, and coming up with solutions that are going to benefit both. But primarily considering in the maintenance world, primarily considering the fact that they're our customer, and we need to always keep that in mind.
Great advice. Thank you. I like that you mentioned listen first, caught that, listen to their concerns and their perspective.
Yep.
Outstanding.
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to flip a little bit to a more, maybe a little bit more tactical conversation that we discussed at a previous date. That's CMMS.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So our audience, I would venture to say 99 to 100% work with some level of CMMS.
Sure.
And you've worked through and found the benefits of it and how to best utilize. Could you walk us through that?
Sure. In fact, where I'm at now, we're actually just bringing a CMMS system on board. We're doing it for obvious reasons. Trying to organize and set priorities and making sure your PMs are meeting, their schedule, and keeping track of all the problems that come with facilities, your HVAC systems, your plumbing, your heat.
There's problems with facilities?
Well, not where I work, but
sorry, keep going.
Gotcha. No problem. But just being able to manage to keep track of all those things, you have to have something. They didn't have anything where I'm at. I have worked with a few SAP, eMate by Fluke, and Fix by Rockwell. So far of the ones that, and then of course your standard spreadsheet, right? Your Excel spreadsheet. Mm-hmm. The one I'm most comfortable with is Fix. It's the one I've had the most experience with. That's what we're implementing. But honestly, it's really a matter of it meets a couple of things for you. It gives your guys a priority because you can assign the priorities. It lets them know, it gives them a work list, lets them know what the priorities are. And then if somebody else tries to pull them off, they can say, hey, I'm doing this. This is my schedule. Go put a work order in, and then we'll see where it falls out. And it also gives you the ability to print reports, your KPIs, your downtimes, your how, and most importantly, and I don't know, I hope a lot of other managers look at this. You can develop your staffing plan just off of your CMMS system and how many people you need based on your hours. And that's the shortfall that I'm dealing with right now. They've never had anything like this before. Everything's been run with radios and emails. And so the technicians don't have any kind of prioritization. They have, really they're in a lot of situations where they'll be working something, somebody calls for them on the radio, they drop what they're doing, they run to the other thing, and nothing ever gets completed for long periods of time. And so that's one of the reasons. That was like the first thing. In fact, when I was interviewing for this job, I was like, well, what CMMS do you guys? Because they were telling me about all these problems. And I said, well, what CMMS do you have? And I just got a deer in the headlight. And I was like, okay, so that's the first thing we have to do. And so now we're actually in the first week of implementation starting next week. So
congratulations. That's great. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
You mentioned something that I'm sure many others are doing, yet it hasn't come up specifically on the show yet. So could you talk a little bit more about how you're tying hours together with developing a staffing plan?
Yeah. So you essentially, you have your preventive maintenance. As long as that is in your CMMS system, whichever one that may be, and there's a bunch of good ones out there. Maintain X, I've seen their demos. Brightly has a really, really good CMMS system. And they're all fairly similar, but you can take your preventive maintenance and just based off of your preventive maintenance and look at the total man hours that are involved and then look at what your staffing is. Do you have enough man hours with the staffing you have to complete that preventive maintenance? If you don't, well, then you need to staff up. And then add on top of that your reactive maintenance. If you combine that, and then you really get a really good look at what you have. Now, a lot of places use vendors, third parties. Again, it goes back to the relationship building. Folks sign service agreements and things like that. So you have to obviously add that to the equation and say, okay, well, these things don't really take my guys a lot of time because we have a service agreement. But, to be realistic, but yeah, that's how I use it. I just use the hours overall and what my man hours are total, for each week. You break it down to a week, a year, a month, however you want to do it. So that's the way I do it.
It's great. Appreciate you walking us right through that. That's fantastic. And at the end of the show, we're going to ask you to share your contact information. So if anyone has deeper questions or really is interested, that hopefully they can reach out to you, Dustin.
Sure, no problem.
Awesome. Hey, rock stars. If you're tuning into the podcast and are feeling overwhelmed by all the maintenance demands at your facility, don't stress. We've got you covered. Our sponsor, Colutus, is your go-to partner to help you tackle all those demands and get them done right, on time, and with top-notch quality. From project planning to execution, Colutus is there to make hard work easy. Visit colutus.com today to get started. Awesome. So on the flip side of the positive, right? Not that it's negative, but what are the pitfalls of CMMS and how have you overcome them, or what have you observed or done?
So a couple of the pitfalls that I've ran into were at my last employer. They had implemented it, actually, 5 or 6 years prior to me getting there. And they did the initial implementation. They did a really good job with the initial implementation with making sure all their PMs were entered. They were also trying to use it for parts management because you can use it for that as well. They were trying to use it for that. They got all their parts in that they were dealing with at that time. They got, all their equipment, their equipment identification codes, all of that was in there. It was all really good. And then they stopped and just didn't update anything for years. And
why?
So they just didn't. Various reasons, management turnover, the techs weren't doing it because the techs, that wasn't their role. So they weren't going to do it. Didn't really have any extra folks to do it. So they just didn't do it. So that was one of the things. So you have to make sure as your equipment changes out, as your PMs change, as your parts change, you have to update all that in your CMMS. If you don't, you're going to find yourself in a really bad position with regard to being able to accurately track your man hours with regard to and your even your PMs and what needs to be done.
Now, let me pinpoint something there. Because and maybe this is important, maybe it's not. But when you said they stopped using it, and you said you have to update everything in it, who's the best person, or what's the best role to do that? What cadence? Yeah.
Yeah, and so most of the CMMS companies that I've worked with, you can call a helpline. If you have data and you're not sure how it needs to be updated, you can send them spreadsheets and they'll do it for you. They'll just update the database. Or in my case, what I like to do is I get myself and one of my technicians, at least one, involved, and have that discussion. Okay, well, we're adding this new piece of equipment. If you have an engineering staff that's a production engineer or any of those guys, your validation engineers, they're really good about hey, we have this is a new piece of equipment. Here's all the PMs for it, so on and so forth. And they'll help you enter that stuff. And that should be part of when you're bringing, specifically for new pieces of equipment, bringing it on board. Part of your, factory acceptance testing and on-site testing once it's there, all that stuff. So we made that part of that. And then we would sit down, enter the stuff into the CMMS and go from there.
Any other pitfalls? Because this is super important, right? This is a heartbeat for the facilities team.
It really is. And one of the things that I think folks have to understand, and I know the facilities guys do, every facilities guy out there understands everybody's emergency is their emergency, but that isn't necessarily your emergency. And so a lot of times what will happen is if you aren't prioritizing based on what the needs of your customer are in fix, sometimes you got to be really careful about how to manage those priorities within the system that gives your guys their basic work list of what they need to hit next. It's just something to be careful about. And then you can get also fixated on fix or your CMMS and kind of think that that's the only way to get things done. And, I'm kind of in the opposite situation now where they've never had anything like this. So it's going to be, hey, did you put a work order in for this? Well, no, I used the radio. Where in the opposite situation where they are experienced and your answer is, hey, have you put a work order in for this? Yeah, they got it. They know they have to put a work order in, but if it's a priority and something's broken, again, you have to make sure you're prioritizing correctly. And if it's something that needs to happen right now, let's go get it done. We'll get the work order entered as we go. So
awesome. If there's anything else, just, we could talk to it now, or we can come back to it. This is really good data.
No, I mean, I really like utilizing CMMS. It's like I said, great for KPIs, your mean time between failures, your mean time to repair, all your PMs. Like I said, it's just a great way to track. If you're utilizing it for your parts, you can set your minimums, maximums. You can set it up to send out your purchase request automatically. They'll email those right to purchasing or however your business is set up. And you can tie it into a lot of your other business software. So it makes a lot of sense to use them.
Phenomenal. I think you're going to get some people contacting you. I really do. Well, you have a very good handle on it. Not that others don't, but that's
right.
One of the biggest ideas of the podcast, Dustin, and we just talked about this, and everyone who's been on knows, it's the sharing of best practices. Like, hey, if there's one nugget that you drop today, like, oh shit, I didn't think of that. I'm going to do that in my business. Right. So, yeah. So really appreciate you expanding like you have been.
Yep. No problem.
I get a little personal on this one. So you brought this up. So you gave me carte blanche, right?
Sure.
So when something doesn't go quite right, I think you said something to the effect of you take it personally, or it affects you personally. Yep. Yeah. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Jay, it's part of my upbringing, the military, when I'm responsible for something and it's not right, I take that, it hurts. I take that very personally. I want to make everything perfect all the time. I don't want to say I'm a perfectionist because that's definitely far from the case, but I want things to be great for my team. I want things to be great for the production team and for everybody to have everything they need and to remove those roadblocks to get in people's way. Even if there's something as little as, hey, the process flow could be better if we move this piece of equipment, this downdraft table from here to here. That way you're not having to walk around it. And so just little things like that. So yeah, and then broken pieces of equipment just drive me absolutely batshit crazy.
So how do you manage that? Obviously, not everything can be perfect all the time.
Yeah, no, I mean, and really, it drives me nuts. And sometimes I have to take a step back, and say, look, I can only do what I can do. There's no magic wand to this. I a magic pill. I have to wait. I have to be patient. Things have to play out, whatever the case may be, whether you're troubleshooting something, you're repairing in the repair cycle, or, production needs, uh, something that needs you to move something, even HVAC or there's a leak in the bathroom, that, that kind of stuff. Well, I got to wait till this contractor gets here. I gotta wait till this contractor. Oh, well, so, and you just have to I have to kind of sometimes just take a step back because I do take it personally. I also take it personally because military training again.
I think you mentioned Navy Standard. Is that what we
Yeah,
talked about? Yeah.
and it kind of goes along with, your 5S and how your work centers are set up and things like that. Everything has its place and every place has its thing. And that's the way I look at everything. And that was beat into my head for years of being on a submarine because you have to stow the submarine correctly. Otherwise, you're making noise and you can't do that. So, I look at everything kind of from that lens and try to improve things, with that, include 5S into that, and kind of roll those two together. And, but like I said, I have to take a step back sometimes, calm myself down a little bit, to be able to even communicate effectively to my team. And then like right now, I'm brand new. I just started at this position in, Thanksgiving week. So I'm still getting familiar with my team. They're still feeling me out. So I have to really tread lightly there right now. Because I'm still letting them get to know me.
Sure. I love your humility and your transparency, by the way, just being able to talk about, hey, this is a challenge for me, right? I can only imagine the team around you appreciates that.
I hope they do. I've had folks tell me both from above me and guys that worked for me. They tell me I'm the most patient person that they've ever met, and they don't understand how I can be so calm all the time. Because I do. I just try to stay very even keeled. No highs, no lows, just very even all the time. Of course, I joke around with folks, and I'm the first one to, try to say something funny, to get everybody to relax a little bit. But I just try to, and I've been told that even from, higher ups above me that are fairly high in the company. They're like, it's just always even keeled. We know what we're getting. There's no surprises. It's always the same. That is a learned skill. I can tell you that
Yes.
that's from years and years and years of doing it wrong
Okay.
and
All right.
learning from that. Yep.
Well, you kind of just answered. I mean, we're going to get back into like throwing back to where you grew up and things like that. But that's an interesting, again, humility. Thanks for that. Like years of doing things wrong, and then you learn that. So
Yep.
Oh yeah,
And
I'm
I've
working on
learned
that
a
every day.
lot from the folks that I've worked for. And
Hmm.
I've kind of tried to take at least a little bit from all of them. And I've been very lucky. I've had some great mentors throughout my life, just in general, but also on the professional side of things. I've had some really great mentors. I've had some really bad ones, but I've learned from them too. And so that's kind of how I've gotten to where I'm at.
What made a great mentor for you?
So, like I said, the honesty,
Hmm.
letting me know the why,
Hmm.
explaining things to me. And one of the biggest things, and this was probably, he was my first chief, for my division in the Navy. He always gave us what we needed. He made sure we had what we needed, but that wasn't always what we wanted.
Mm.
And a lot of
Mm.
people don't understand that. Um, and so I kind of, that was like the biggest lesson I learned from him is give your folks what they need. Doesn't mean it's what they want.
Love that.
Mhm.
That's fantastic. So I wanted to ask you about managing teams, and I think you really already touched on a lot of it, but like specifically in a facilities role, um, how have you best organized team management? If there's anything more to say around that, right? Like either management leadership, people leadership, right? Your team.
Yeah, no problem. Again, it goes back as far as from my position, try to be honest with them. Now, as far as like how I structure the team, because building every place I've been, I'm not sure how I've ended up being this guy, but every place I go, I have to build a team. And typically I look at, obviously the CMMS information and pull that, look at the staffing plan, see how many folks we need. And then I, go through the interview process and that whole thing. And one of the things that I always look for, obviously depending on your facility and what your techs are responsible for, and how that's split up, whether you just have strict facilities guys, electricians, plumbers, that kind of guys, or if you have actual machine technicians. And if that's split, you may have both teams. But I always try to hire somebody that not only has the skill set, and a lot of times I will actually take a guy that maybe doesn't have the experience, but he's going to fit in with the team better.
Mm.
Um, the personalities, the chemistry kind of matches a little better. Then I'll look at a guy that, super experienced, but man, this guy's just not the right fit. So I do look at that quite a bit, and that's not always the case. It just depends on the situation. Um, I like to structure my teams. Myself, I typically like to, now I don't have it where I'm at, but I like to have a supervisor below me that handles kind of the day-to-day stuff, sets the priorities for the day, tells the individual techs where to go and what to do. Um, and then I handle more the overall big picture stuff. That's the way I like to have it structured. Doesn't always work that way, but that's the way I like it. But as far as, I mean, and we've all had, and it doesn't matter whether your facilities, production, you know, supply chain, it doesn't matter. You have the quiet guy that doesn't say much, just kind of comes to work, does his job, doesn't want to be bothered, and goes home. You always have that guy. You always have guy or girl. You always have the guy or girl that is the lunchroom lawyer. I is what I like to call him.
Ooh, who's that?
That's
Explain that role to the job description, please.
the individual that breaks down every state and local policy that the company is, in their eyes, breaking, and that they should be going to HR and knows every HR policy and knows every OSHA rule and every rule of from the DEP. And yes, those people.
And
Everybody has
how
one.
do you lead that lawyer?
Patiently, with a lot of patience.
Gotcha.
That's really the key with them. A lot of times it's just letting them say what they got to say. Um, okay, I heard you. I understand. This is what we're doing. You know, um, and again, a lot of times they don't like it, but they I've never ran into anybody yet that has flat out, whether they agreed, disagreed with a task or a job or whatever. I've never ran into anybody yet, military or civilian life, that flat out refuses to do a job. As long as it's safe, as long as it's something that nobody's going to get hurt, I've never ran into that.
Got it. Great stuff. I really appreciate you, and I know every listener appreciates you walking through that whole structure right there.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to flip this a little bit, and we've learned a ton. I mean, super high value right now. Like I super high value content and great conversation. Dustin, cannot thank you enough for that. And so now I will say we want to learn more about you.
Okay.
Like you've been mentioning a few times, right? It goes back to, where you grew up, where you came from in the military. I mean, super curious, whatever you'd like to share,
Sure.
please do.
So I am actually originally from a very small town, 2 stoplights, in Western Pennsylvania. And the town's name's Everett. I joke around a lot of times with folks. I call it Pennsyltucky. Because it is a very small town, um, very close knit community. I'm very, very proud of where I'm from. Huge Penn State football fan, huge Pittsburgh Steelers fan, anything Pittsburgh sports, because I grew up. That's how I grew up. Like I said, the town I live in, not much industry there, and it's very a poor community for the most part. Not poverty, but it's not a high income area. A lot of farming, dairy farming, things like that. And that's really kind of the industry there. There's not much else there. So folks work hard. And that's kind of the way I grew up. You work hard, you're honest with your neighbor, and you take care of each other.
Sounds like a good standard to live by.
It is. And if somebody needs help, you go help them. And they shouldn't have to ask. You should just do it. That's kind of the environment I grew up in. My dad is a truck driver, was a truck driver the whole time I grew up. A lot of good values from him. Hard work. I've never met anybody who works harder than him. My mom always took great care of us and was kind of the loving side of things. Because, of course, back when I grew up, a little older, I'm going to date myself, folks could actually live on a single family member working. So mom raised us and dad was out on the road. So when I was 17, I decided that I was going to leave home and see the big wide world and join the Navy. So I did, and was on my first submarine by the time I was 19 years old.
Wow.
So, and I've never actually been home again. I've been stationed, on the East Coast most of my career, but have never actually lived back in my home ever since then. Spent 22 years, like I said, in the Navy, had a lot of really good leaders and a few really bad ones, that mentored me and kind of showed me the ropes. 5 different submarines, Iraqi freedom, was over there for all of that. I'm really, really super proud of my naval service. I
You should be.
I would do it again. I know a lot of people don't necessarily want to say that, but I would absolutely do it again. The submarine force is filled with some really outstanding people.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the submarine force? I don't personally know a lot about that.
Sure.
Dustin.
It's all volunteer. Now there are minimum, like for the enlisted side, minimum scoring requirements for certain jobs and things like that. But just a lot of really good people. Your operational tempo, which means how often you're gone, especially on an attack submarine. At some points of my career, we were gone 85% of the time, over a year. you know, out there a lot. It's a tough life. It used to be a lot tougher because there was no communication with back home. That has increased and gotten better over the years. So it's not quite as bad, but you're still isolated. It's a very isolated environment. You have to learn to put your life in other people's hands because everybody on board that submarine has to be able to save your life if something bad happens. Um, Very intelligent community. The folks, everybody that's on there is electronics technicians, electricians, machinists, nuclear machinists, having to deal with, I mean, the nuclear power, obviously those guys are super smart. Our officer corps is very, very sharp. Um, those guys are top of the line guys that enter the submarine force and are accepted in. So it's a great community to say I was in. At no point in time, really, my whole career, did I ever feel unsafe. It was a great place. And like I said, a lot of really good people. Just the people were great. I have friends now all over the country from it.
Just want to say this pleasure to listen to you talk about the camaraderie, I mean,
Oh,
the
yeah.
brotherhood, if you will. You have each other's back. You have to put your life in other people's hands and trust them. All these things are just such great things to hear.
Yep.
Um, I'd love to ask you this question. Like, is there anything you could share about a mission or a deployment that, you know, common person like me would never even think of or know or imagine?
Yeah, I've been to the Arctic Circle and broken through the ice 12 times, 13 times.
Wow.
So I've been to the North Pole more times than I can count. It's, it kind of got to be, we're back again. But I mean, that's a big deal.
Sure. I can imagine it is.
One of the submarines I was on, I don't know if any of the folks out there are listening. If they're Stargate fans, Stargate made a made for DVD movie years ago. Stargate Continuum is what it was called. The submarine that's in that they filmed was actually filmed above the Arctic Circle, breaking through the ice. That was my submarine. I was on board at the time,
Look at you,
and
movie star.
yeah, so yeah, so we get to do a lot of cool stuff like that. Plus, I mean, I've been all over the world. Um, I've been everywhere. The Middle East, the Caribbean, South America, all over Europe. Obviously the North Pole. I mean, just all over the Indian Ocean, everywhere. So, you know what?
That's amazing.
What 20-something kid can say, "Well, I toured Rome," for my job.
Right. You'd be the only one I know.
Yeah. So, so yeah, there was a lot of cool stuff. But then, it comes with its downsides too. Just like any branch of the service, military has high divorce rates. You see that happen all the time. In the submarine force, it's a pretty high divorce rate branch of the Navy because we are gone so much. Most of all my friends have. And luckily, for a guy like me, luckily when I retired, I met an amazing, intelligent, just super brilliant woman who I have no idea why she's with me, but we ended up getting married after I retired. And, we live our life now with two dogs and just kind of enjoy our time and travel when we can and, come home and enjoy each other's company every day.
Dustin, that is so good to hear. Congratulations and good for you, man.
Thanks.
That's awesome. Man, I can't thank you enough for walking us through that journey. That was awesome. But anything else you'd like to discuss?
If anybody ever needs any help, I'm always a phone call, an email, whatever away. I have no issues helping anybody in this community out. It's a tough job sometimes. As we all know, we get calls all hours of the night and weekends, holidays, because stuff always goes wrong. So I don't mind being being an ear to bend, so to speak, if somebody's having a bad day or they just need some advice or maybe some help with something. And, we've got a lot of companies out there that, work similar industries. And maybe we know a contractor or a vendor or somebody else that can help us out.
Thank you, because that's exactly why, as we talked earlier, Facility Rockstars community was built upon that foundation for that reason. Like, build this community, get people together, and share with each other.
Yep.
So how would you prefer people reach out to you then?
Just text me. That's probably the easiest way. My phone is 508-344-6927. Just text me. I'll get back to you. That is my work phone number. And I have that phone on me all the time. So, that's
Excellent.
probably the easiest way. If you want to email me, it's dustin.bussard@circor.com. And again, I'll be happy to answer anything and help in any way I can.
Awesome. Well, Dustin, again, I'm going to say thank you for your service in the Navy. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for investing so much time with us on the show and like really spreading your knowledge with our community. So thank you so much for that.
No, really appreciate you having me on, Jay.
Of course. Everyone listening, if you learned from Dustin today, if you laughed, if you wanted to refer someone, tell someone else about the show. We'd love to grow our community. And Dustin, thank you again. Another great episode of Facility Rockstars. We'll catch everyone next time.
It's a wrap. Another episode of Facility Rockstars is in the books. Facility Rockstars is sponsored by Colutus, operating the way you operate in order to make your life easier. Until next time, facilitate and rock on.